Back in the late 1800s, European countries were feeling very ambitious. They looked at Africa, a continent full of resources and possibilities, and they wanted it. European countries were driven by a powerful mix of money, politics, and social ideas. They needed raw materials like rubber, diamonds, and gold to power their factories. Africa had a lot of these, and controlling them meant wealth and power. But it wasn't just about money. European countries also wanted to look important in the world. They thought having colonies in Africa made them look stronger. The more land they controlled, the more powerful they seemed. This competition for colonies, fueled by national pride and rivalry, almost led to war in Europe. On top of all this, many Europeans thought they were better than other cultures. They believed it was their job to civilize people they saw as less advanced. This racist idea was used to justify taking over Africa and forcing European ways of life onto African societies. This feeling of superiority blinded many Europeans to the rich and diverse cultures they were about to disrupt. All these things, greed, ambition, and prejudice, created a dangerous situation that would change Africa forever. It set the stage for a mad dash to grab African land, a scramble that would redraw the map of Africa and leave a lasting legacy of division. The Berlin Conference of 1884–85 would be the most important event in this process, officially dividing Africa among the European powers. The Berlin Conference, which happened in 1884, was a huge event in African history. 14 European countries met there. The United States was also there to protect its interests in Liberia. Importantly, no one from Africa was invited. The future of the continent was being decided by outsiders, showing how unbalanced power was at that time. The goal of the conference was to make rules for colonization and trade in Africa. European countries wanted to avoid fighting each other. They knew their scramble for Africa could start a bigger war in Europe, and they didn't want that. So, the Berlin Conference was a place to talk and compromise, even though it wasn't fair to Africa. One major result of the conference was that it officially started the scramble for Africa. They decided on the effective occupation rule. This meant that if a European country wanted to claim land, it had to show it controlled it. This led to a rush to build outposts, force local rulers to sign treaties and send in armies. The Berlin Conference also made rules for using important rivers, like the Congo and Niger. They encouraged free trade in the new areas they had just divided up. But the conference didn't talk about ending slavery. It also ignored the many different cultures and languages in Africa. Ignoring these things would have serious consequences. After the Berlin Conference, European countries started taking over Africa very quickly. Following the agreements they made in Berlin, they raced to claim land. They sent in armies, forced people to sign treaties, and drew borders without caring about existing ethnic groups, cultures, or languages. Great Britain, with its huge empire, focused on East Africa, taking control of Kenya, Uganda, and parts of Sudan. France took over West Africa, creating colonies in Senegal, Mali, and Ivory Coast. Belgium, ruled by the cruel King Leopold II, took the Congo and killed millions of people. Germany claimed parts of East and Southwest Africa, and Portugal expanded its control in Angola and Mozambique. Europe took over Africa with shocking speed and cruelty. In just a few decades, almost all of Africa, except for Ethiopia and Liberia, was controlled by Europe. This fast takeover was terrible for African societies. Traditional leaders lost their power. Economies were changed to benefit Europe, and anyone who resisted was violently stopped. The random borders drawn by Europeans, which often divided existing groups and forced rival groups together, caused problems that continue today. These divisions still cause ethnic tensions and make it hard for countries to unite. The scramble for Africa left a complicated and sad legacy, a clear reminder of the terrible human cost of colonialism. The Berlin Conference and the scramble for Africa still affect the continent today. The random borders created artificial countries, often putting together different ethnic groups who didn't have much in common. This has led to ongoing ethnic tensions, arguments over borders, and fighting within countries. The way Europeans used Africa for its resources also continues to cause problems. African economies were designed to benefit Europe, focusing on taking raw materials and growing crops for export. This left many African countries dependent on selling just a few things, making them vulnerable to changes in world prices and without much industry. The effects of this are still seen today, slowing economic growth and contributing to poverty and inequality. But the story of Africa since the Berlin Conference isn't just about being a victim. The continent has shown incredible strength and a determination to control its own future. Independence movements grew, driven by a desire for freedom from colonial rule. By the mid-1900s, things had changed, and African countries started to become independent. The legacy of the Berlin Conference is complicated. It's a story of division, exploitation, and the lasting impact of colonialism, but it's also a story of resilience, the fight for freedom, and the continuing effort to achieve unity and prosperity. As Africa faces the challenges of the 21st century, the lessons of the past remind us how important self-determination is, the need for fair development, and the lasting power of Pan-African unity.